Hello again, fellow podcaster, and welcome back to Pod Theory. I am your host, Jason Cercone, and today we're going to look at 3 things that will keep you going when your podcast has no listeners. Now, unless you're launching your podcast with a built-in audience, the early days of your show will pretty much fall on deaf ears. That's just the reality of it. Now, a built-in audience could come from an active, engaged social media following, an established email list, or you might just have a shitload of friends. But in most cases, you'll need to gain some positive momentum in order to attract more listeners. As you launch your podcast, you'll learn. You'll need to promote your show like crazy. You'll need to tell everyone you know. You'll use social media to contribute to conversations in your communities, as well as sharing clips and sound bites from your show, as well as posts that will link people to your podcast. You'll be running paid advertisements. There's really a lot that goes into the marketing end of it, and believe me, we'll be covering that in more detail on future episodes of Pod Theory. But in the beginning, if you don't have a built-in audience, you have to build one. It's as simple as that. Once your podcast catches on, the sky's the limit. But in those leaner days, as your show kicks off, it's important to remember why you're doing your podcast in the first place, because it can be disheartening to think that you're putting all this time and effort into pushing this content out there, but the listeners just aren't coming. But keep the faith. All of those things that I mentioned a moment ago to promote the show, it's going to start to snowball, and when that snowball gets rolling downhill, you know what happens next. So in those lean times, here are 3 easy things to remember when your podcast has no listeners that will help you keep your spirits up and help you keep pushing forward. Number 1, understand what you're building. Your podcast should be designed to be a long-term content approach. Now, you want your early shows to sizzle so you have a solid foundation, and as your audience grows, they'll go back and find those early episodes and discover the same consistency and the same impact that you're delivering on your current episodes. Number 2, your early episodes will give you time to get comfortable behind the mic with a smaller audience. Now, as you do more podcasts, you're going to become more comfortable and your delivery on the mic is going to become more natural. And if you don't have a lot of experience hosting a podcast or being on a microphone for anything in general, you're going to need a minute to find your sea legs. It's pretty much impossible to find a successful podcast where the host actually got worse over time. So embrace the lack of listeners as time to hone your skill set and to get you comfortable for the long haul. That way, when you're producing more episodes in the future, the more natural you're going to be and the more fun you're going to have because you know that you've got this shit down. And finally, number 3, people don't know what they're missing. Now, if you do what's required of you from a production and a marketing and promotional standpoint, your podcast is going to get discovered. Then you'll have listeners. And as I mentioned before, those listeners are going to come looking for your early episodes as much as your current ones. The overall point here is to not let the early days get you down. Don't get discouraged when you see low download numbers at the very beginning. There is no content platform on the planet that doesn't come with some growing pains. And again, as I mentioned at the top of the show, if you have a built-in audience through your social media or your email list, then you're in a great spot. And more than likely, those people are going to follow you to your podcast. But if you're starting fresh, that's okay too. Focus on producing quality content in your niche and marketing your show effectively, and your audience will eventually show up for every show you publish. And that's going to bring the curtain down on this session of Pod Theory. If you liked it, take a screenshot of this episode, share it in your Instagram story, and tag me at Jason Cercone. I'd love to know what you thought of the episode. You can also pick up my free podcast primer to help you build the solid foundation your show needs to grow and succeed at jasoncercone.com/podcast primer. Good talk. I'll see you back here tomorrow. This has been Jason Cercone on Pod Theory.